So we've discussed solar. What about wind systems? What are some of the initial pros and cons of that? And then what are things to consider as far as things that you need to consider in creating a wind system?
First consideration is whether you're the right sort of person to work with a wind turbine. You need a sense of humor. You need to be pretty mechanically handy. It's not a good idea to expect anyone to come out and fix your wind turbine for you in the middle of January, because they're not going to. If you buy one that has a good warranty and a good company behind it, they'll send you the parts and you put them in yourself. There's only about 6 pieces to a wind turbine. They are not complicated machines. You will learn every one of those 6 pieces intimately during your association with it, because you'll have to replace every one at some point. So you do need to be handy. You need to be willing to fix it when it breaks, because it's going to break. Ours has suffered 14 major failures in 5 years. Up to and including the entire turbine falling off the top of the tower folding in half, twice the blades flew off, burned up stators, burned up rectifiers, and at least 1 good lightning strike that fried the box. You need a winch to get the tower up and down. It's a good idea when you plan your tower to have some means of accessing it that's cheaper and easier than a crane. One of the considerations is how much space do you have to work with. If you have less than 5 acres, I would not recommend a wind turbine. If you have neighbors close to your property lines, I would not recommend a wind turbine because they can be noisy and disruptive. But if you're living off-grid, chances are you're out in the middle of nowhere, and you probably have a decent-sized chunk of land, and that's perfect for wind turbines. Question is, what's your wind resource? Solar is pretty consistent statewide. You can look at a map and say we're going to get this many hours of insolation in winter and this many in summer, and that's pretty consistent. Wind can vary locally in a quarter mile, where one site may be excellent and one site may be poor. A good wind speed, if you're putting a monitor up or a logging data meter to measure your resource, that's the best way to go about it.
Is that what you did?
I had put a wind meter out on a stick and came out and checked it weekly and recorded it and had it up there for about 2 years. So I had a pretty good idea of what we would get out of a turbine. Our wind speed in this property is 14.5 miles an hour year round. It does vary seasonally, less in Wyoming than in places like Iowa. That's about 16.5 during the winter months and about 11 during the summer. But we average 14.5 year round. That's a good to very good wind resource. Anything less than about 12, 11 to 12, it's probably not worth going with wind power. You're better off with solar. If you have a lot of trees around, that can knock down the wind speed or cause turbulence. If you have a rolling property or a lot of sharp embankments, it can be difficult to have good wind. You never want to mount a wind turbine on the roof of your house. It's noisy, it will shake the house to pieces, and when pieces fall off the wind turbine or it falls off the tower, it's going to come crashing through the ceiling of your house. You'd want it 100 to 200 feet away from your house, so that's why a large piece of property is important to begin with.
When you put up your wind meter, first of all, where did you get one from? Can you
I got a little
file it
handheld one, but it's nice because it doesn't rely on direction. It has a little whirligig on top that windsurfers and hang gliders use. And this one is also good because it would log average wind speed and maximum wind speed for about a 7-day period before it went to sleep. So as long as you came out once a week, you could check what its settings were, reset it, and put it back on the pole.
Do you need them a certain height above the ground to get an accurate reading, or just?
You can project that the wind on your finished tower will be higher than what you record out here. But generally, record wind at ground level and use that to make your calculations, or 8 to 10 feet above ground level. I have a little weather station out there now that's about 10 feet up, and it's recording logging wind speeds to the computer, in fact. So that's a good idea, is to know what your resource is going in. You don't want to buy an expensive turbine, then it just doesn't produce much electricity. Because the relevant equation is that wind power increases as a cube of wind speed. So if the wind in one place is twice as fast as in another, you have 8 times as much wind power to work with. So very small differences in wind speed between one location on your property versus another, or between one property versus another, can make or break your wind system. But 12 miles an hour is generally considered, on any scale, whether it's for utility grade giant wind turbines or small cabin-sized wind turbines. About 12 miles an hour is where wind has enough energy in it to be worthwhile to put a turbine in it. It's why you want a tall tower. Put up the tallest tower that zoning regulations and practicality and money will allow. Because the wind at the top of a 100-foot tower is better than twice the wind speed at head level. And that means it has 8 times as much power. So it's like putting up a wind turbine that's much, much larger than the one you're actually putting up. It's a way to leverage your turbine size is by putting it on top of a taller tower. Gets it up in clear air, away from the turbulence, and it's up in the fast air. It's harder to handle. It's harder to raise and lower to work on a turbine. But
I know with, you talked about having not enough wind. So around here, I know we have sometimes way more than enough wind. So is it a problem having too much wind in a site?
yes, small wind turbines are vulnerable to breakage, not so much catastrophic, but just being shaken apart over time by very strong winds. Parts fail just from stress and fatigue and vibration. Most turbines have built into them some form of governing mechanism, where if the wind, in the case of my Berge XL1 turbine, if the wind exceeds 28 miles an hour, it will begin furling. That is, the blades, the plane of the blades will actually turn sideways to the wind. And that takes them out of the wind, they'll slow down. When the wind gust stops, the blades will face back into the wind and it'll start rotating again. During the furling process, they're extremely loud, these side furling. You have some blades chopping upwind, you have some blades going downwind. They're cyclically loading and unloading, and that's what makes them go very bad. And that's part of what shakes them to pieces. But it is an elegant, simple, inexpensive self-protection mechanism. You'll have some that use alternator braking that actually use the electrical pulsing through the magnets of the turbine to try and slow it down. But if the wind's strong enough, it will overcome your alternator braking and set your turbine on fire because it's essentially just short-circuiting the turbine. And eventually the brakes will be overcome by the force of the wind and your turbine will burn up. So alternator braking is not a real good idea in Wyoming with our extreme wind events that we get out here. The ultimate system for governing, for speed governing of a wind turbine, is blade pitching, where as the wind speeds up, the blades will actually change the angle of attack to the wind. They'll rotate on their bases. And that's what the large commercial turbines use. And that's the best output and the best longevity for your wind turbine is to buy one that has pitchable blades. It is very difficult to find a small wind turbine that uses this, and they tend to be quite expensive.